Okay. We can get to that at another time, but really important in this context, in Amherst, Massachusetts, Harmony Institute, A Course in Miracles, very soon after Louis began his study with Claire, probably after maybe the first season of classes, maybe by Christmas or so, she said, hey, teaching is an accelerated form of learning. If you'd like, you can teach with me. And one place that I would recommend you join me in teaching A Course in Miracles under the name of Attitudinal Healing is in the local maximum security prison in Northampton. It's like, Louis was like, all right, let's do it. So Louis became Claire's assistant in teaching A Course in Miracles via Attitudinal Healing program started by Jerry Jampolsky in the prison to a group of inmates serving life terms for violent crimes, murder, rape, and whatever. So it was a fascinating experience for Louis to sit in the circle of very scary men and introduce these ideas about how they could change their mind, how they could change. They can't really change their lives, but they could certainly experience a transformation. It doesn't matter if you're behind bars where you are. In fact, later in Louis' story, he gets involved in a prison ashram project, and making a note to myself to remember that for later, Bo's book, and we're all doing time. Anyway, prison is actually a place where many, many individuals have a transformation because they don't have very many distractions. They're dealing with life in prison, but it's a very, very common thing. And many, many men, Louis was involved in this pen pal program, and he received some beautiful letters from these men, most of them Black men in prison in Florida State Penitentiary, that going through these remarkable transformations and in Islam as their avenue, at least many of them with whom he had contact, and just a beautiful thing. So I remember, in fact, there was the time that Louis was in the circle with Claire, and of course I'm watching all this, and Claire's asking the group of men if it was okay that they talk about love. And it was such a fascinating thing, because Louis was sitting next to this Hispanic man whose name was appropriately Jesus, and real scary looking guy, puck face and all that. And it was fascinating for Louis to watch these men, one, always put their eyes down to the floor when it came their turn to respond to Claire's question. And all of them said in their own timid way, and when Jesus did, his chin was trembling like he was going to maybe start crying, but that's kind of taboo in prison. You don't start crying. But they're just saying, yes, it's okay. We can talk about love. Just an amazing thing. Louis' heart just opened up for Jesus and thought, wow, anybody can be seen as your brother, as your sister, if you get to that heart center where you just realize that there's no difference between this individual and myself. The only difference perhaps with Jesus is he had a little less cultural conditioning that kept Louis out of prison. But in the last session, talking about Louis' dark journey, there were things that happened with him where he might have been this far away from being in prison. So it's, as a matter of fact, there was that one time when an officer kind of found Louis in the situation, and a terrible situation. More or less, the officer rescued him, had him in the squad car, and he's asking Louis, you appear to be a well-educated, white man, like, why are you here? Why are you in this very, very, very bad place? like you should know better. But again, that was part of the dark journey Louis had to go through, so that one day he could sit in a circle of these men who had been swallowed up by the dark side, now serving life sentences in prison. So, again, that was part of Louis's journey, that he had to get that close to that life in order to be able to really appreciate, like, wow, but for the grace of God, there go I. So very fascinating time, like I say, with Claire and Ben, beautiful people. I'll put Claire's picture up in tribute today. She just passed last year, I found out. And yeah, so that was the core training, doing A Course in Miracles every week, several times a week with Claire. He was in a variety of classes, workbook class, text class, doing the prison class, so immersed in A Course in Miracles, of course, also going to AA meetings, 12 steps all the time, getting that loving support. And then Louis ventured out. He was very curious to find other places nearby in this part of the USA where there's other programs where people are on the path. Okay, so Louis spent time at the Kripalu Yoga Retreat Center in Lenox, Mass. He spent time at the Abode Sufi Center in New Lebanon, New York. Spent time at the Omega Center in Rhinebeck, New York, and both went through some programs at Omega and Rhinebeck, and also there was a winter program one year he went to down in Maho Bay, St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands. And this is an interesting story to share, because Louis went down because one of the teachers of that five-day retreat was George Leonard, who Louis became a big fan of. He had written a beautiful book called Education and Ecstasy, and just really talking a lot about an area Louis found very interesting, was sort of alternative education. And he'd gone through the program, Joseph Chilton Pierce, the whole workshop thing, Magical Child, and all of that. So Lou was really interested in education at another level. So we went down to hang with George Leonard for 5 days. But as always happens at Omega in these 5-day retreats, whether at the center in New York or at any of their other, I know they have other locations now, you can always jump from one, say they may have 5 different events going on, different teachers. And after the first day, you're allowed to consider switching. If the one you had signed up for wasn't the right fit, you can switch to another one. And this is what happened to Louis. He went down thinking that he would have this experience with George Leonard, and he found the first day George Leonard was kind of dry. He actually was into Aikido, and his presentation was more about Aikido. And Louis said, well, I'm going to check out another one of the 5 sessions, and one that he checked out was with Pat Rodegast, who was the channel for Emmanuel. And right away, Louis realized that that's why he went down there, to have this encounter with Emmanuel, because like Jesus, Emmanuel, like me, the Sun King, Emmanuel was a pretty high level representation of the divine. And so Louis was in session with Pat Rodegast, Emmanuel, for 4 days. And at one point, Emmanuel, speaking through Pat Rodegast, invited anyone in the group to ask a personal question. And I should be able to remember now, but Louis can't remember what exactly the question was. And it doesn't even really matter, because the point is that the wording of his question, as presented to Emmanuel, was met with a response that was way beyond the scope of Louis' question. It went to the heart of Louis' soul. and this again is the ability that I have, or Jesus has, or Emmanuel, any entity that's representing the eternal knows exactly what the individual who seems separated from the eternal is asking. You know, they're asking a question about home. They're asking a question about love, about safety, about again, this yearning that Louis was fully expressing, his yearning to be one with eternity, to be one with his own higher self. And so Emmanuel saw that and answered Louis in a way that just blew Louis's mind. Again, this was part of what this whole 3-year rebirthing process was about. It was really interesting that one I think the last day, there was free time, of course, every day. I think you had morning sessions, and then the afternoon was free time. And Louis decided he'd always been very afraid. As a child, he had all of his traumas, and one of those traumas was around learning to swim. And Louis was not a competent swimmer at all. But he decided that morning that he saw this yacht anchored a few hundred yards offshore in this bay, and you know, it's calm water, so it was inviting. And Louis just knew that it was appropriate for him to go for a swim, and he wanted to go out and swim around this yacht and then come back. It would, you know, be a good 15-20-minute swim. And Louis did it, and he was filled with this sense of peace, and he felt safe. He felt at home, even in a faraway place, you know, St. John, Virgin Islands. But Maho Bay is a beautiful place. Anyway, so he's swimming around the yacht, and there's a dinghy, of course, a small boat, tethered to the back of the yacht. And he goes around the dinghy, and he sees the name of the dinghy is Grace. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. So Louis just had this really complete experience. These 3 years were so magical in that, you know, by the end of this time, and Louis had made a sort of a mental decision that he would commit 3 years full time to this process of just healing and growing and, you know, being fully rebirthed. And then at 3 years sober, which would be late in 1988, Louis would decide what's next. So tomorrow, the next version of today, we, Sun King, I, and you, we will continue the exploration of Louis's journey of transformation. It's a beautiful story. I'm so grateful you're here with us. Sun King sends blessings. I love you so much.